Hi, Liberators. This is Tiffany Coleman once again with you today on another episode of Interesting People. I have a friend and classmate and former boss, actually, on the show with us today, Dr. Sabrina Dent. Just to let you know a little bit about her, she's the Senior Faith Advisor for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. She recently got her DMin in Race and Race Relations. She's an interfaith advocate, and she's a fellow with the BJC Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Freedom. She's the former president of the Interfaith Community of Greater Richmond, which is my hometown, and she was also a panelist on the C-SPAN Book TV program regarding Melissa Rogers' book, Faith in American Public Life. She is a native of Petersburg, Virginia, and she is also a mother of one, Xavier. I'd like to introduce to some and present to others Dr. Sabrina Dent. How are you today?
I am doing wonderful, Tiffany. Thank you for having me to be a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. It was a no-brainer for me to have you on the show because I feel like you are someone who's doing work that I think is very necessary, especially in the present age that we find ourselves in, the climate that we're in, the culture that we're in right now. I think this is the work that you do is work that we also need to do as people to move forward.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important that we think about the many ways in which religious freedom intersects our lives, whether we're talking about social justice, whether we're talking about reproductive rights, who can love whom, right? Like that's all a part of religious freedom, and how some people unfortunately have chosen to use religious freedom, the term, as a way to discriminate against others. And that's not acceptable, which is why Americans United does the work that we do as a nonpartisan education and advocacy organization, to really defend the separation of church and state. And I should also say that Americans United was founded in 1947 by religious leaders.
Get out!
Yes.
Wow.
There's quite a history around the work that AU has done. And so one of the causes that was taken up by the organization early on had to do with public schools and addressing Catholic schools and issues around religious education, and how, people are brought into spaces. We can talk about that later. I mean, it's such a long history, and I have resources that are available to you. But yeah, Americans United, from the beginning, religious leaders were doing this work. So
that is so interesting and ironic, if you can, which history often is ironic. But so since we're kind of already tipping the iceberg a little bit, what does it mean to have religious freedom and to be religiously free? What does that mean?
Right. So really what it means from a constitutional perspective is that everyone is guaranteed the right. And that when I say everyone, I mean people of all religions and none are guaranteed the right to believe, to practice, or not whatever they choose to practice. So that right is extended to people who identify as Christian, Baha'i, Buddhist, non-religious, or as some people know them, secular humanist, free thinker, atheist, all of that. For me, religious freedom is also a human right and a social justice issue. I really believe that one cannot deeply engage in the work of religious freedom without looking at all the issues that impact our lives. So just to take a step back, to answer your question even more, religious freedom, or the freedom of religion, is the first of our 5 freedoms that are guaranteed within the First Amendment. And so it's really important, as we think about this moment that is happening in the United States, how people have exercised that right, but at the same time to think about how the dangerous actions of people in government, specifically President Trump, have really promoted a violation of religious freedom. So this week, when Trump had tear gas, spilled into the streets of D.C. to disrupt peaceful protesters, to then stand in front of St. John's Church holding a Bible, is problematic because of the fact that we have to remember that that the United States is comprised of people from many different religious traditions, and none. People have different belief systems. So for the president of the United States to then hold up a Bible and tote it after, at the same time, he declared himself the president of law and order is very disturbing. And people need to look at these issues. So what does that mean? What did that act mean for people who are non-religious, who do not uphold the Bible? What does that mean for people from different religions that, that's not their rule of law? That's not how they live, right? So, and we have to remember that the United States is not a Christian nation. It was not founded as a Christian nation, and that the Bible is not the law of the land. The Constitution is. And so the Constitution, with the Establishment Clause, basically states that the government cannot declare a state-sanctioned religion, and that the government cannot show any preference towards any religious group over another, and that's including non-religious groups. And so everyone must be treated fairly. So it's problematic, again, when he's toting a Bible as a prop in front of a Christian church. And so what does that say? Because we also have the right to free exercise. That means that people have the right, again, to practice whatever belief they choose to practice or tradition they choose to be a part of. And that even includes the right, Tiffany, for them to change their religion, right? So you're not, that's why it's beautiful, because the United States is different from a lot of other countries.
Right.
And the people have that freedom that we have and many times taken for granted. And so we must do what is necessary to protect a religious freedom for all in this country. And again, like I said, it spills over into many other issues, including human rights, reproductive justice, how it impacts public schools. For example, last year there was a school that mandated that the schools post, school district stated that they should post "In God We Trust" on the walls. That is problematic, because that's not the separation of church and state. So it's illegal. Again, public schools are places where everyone engages. So we have to think about all these issues, like I said, intersectionally, and how they impact our daily lives, and how they impact what is happening in the public square every day.
That's so interesting, because, and you brought up a couple of things. One, the whole thing that Trump did in front of the church, I'll be honest, as a minister and as a person who is a Christian, I was just confused by it. Like, I was like, what is happening? It really, but I guess it just, I was like, why are we doing this? What is the point of this moment right here? And so having this talk with you helps me to see that that's actually quite threatening to somebody who may not espouse the Bible as their way of life or follow the Christian way or what have you. And I think one of the main issues that a lot of Americans have, especially, is that if somebody is not Christian, we deem them as unworthy, or they don't have a right to be this way, or I have to get you to my way of thinking. And that simply isn't the case. And to the point where people want to do bodily harm to people, and people have done bodily harm to people simply because they are somebody of a different faith. And in that regard, religion then becomes a weapon, where for some people it becomes weaponized, where for some people religion can be freeing. For other people, especially Christianity, I can't speak to the history of other religions with a surety, but I know for a fact that Christianity has been used as a tool, especially as a person with lots and lots of melanin in her skin. I know that Christianity has been a tool of oppression.
It certainly has. So, I mean, think back to the use of the slave Bible,
Absolutely.
where certain passages were cut out of the Bible with the intentions of having enslaved people to remain in bondage, right?
Right.
And to then have this allegiance to their God, and then also to their masters, right? Because you
Mhm.
don't want to disobey your master who's following God, right? So you
Mhm.
think about that, but also to keep in mind that that also religion in the current context has been used to cause damage to individuals that identify with many different communities. It
Right.
has been a tool of oppression, and it also is very dangerous and reckless what was done by Trump. And so we have to speak out about it, that people of all religions and none have a responsibility to raise awareness about what is happening. At the same time, Tiffany, one of the things that I think about as far as what happened is that also think about the bodily harm or the moral injury. I'll say that the moral injury that has happened as a result of religion in the United States and in many other places. Right? We're not excluding other countries in which this has happened, but at the same time, I still champion the fact that we do have this constitutional right which allows us to practice our religious freedom to freely, to change our minds about our religions, but we do not have the right to discriminate. So one of the things that we often say in the religious freedom world is that religious freedom is a shield, not a sword. It is a shield to protect everyone and not a sword to cause harm. And so if I have religious freedom as a person who identifies as spiritual and I have the right to practice freely, I should want to protect that right for my Muslim neighbor, for my Baha'i friend, for my non-religious friend, and all the other communities, right? It's important
Mm.
that we recognize that this right also comes with responsibilities. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, it gets complicated also because there are some traditions, specifically, the Christian tradition is steeped in proselytizing, and that, there should be this conversion moment and everything. But sometimes we just really need to step back and think about our own histories, right? That even the Ku Klux Klan used the Bible,
For
right?
sure.
They read the Bible, they use that as a tool. They said prayers before they gathered around the cross and was
My God.
burning black bodies. So it's like we have to remember that. We also have to remember the history of um, lynching in America, right? That people would go to church in the morning and then the
And go to
afternoon
the
they would do
lynching.
lynchings,
Mhm.
right? So
Bring a
we
picnic
know that
basket.
from right. So yes, yes. So it's important that we think about this in many ways, and also think about the impact that happens when it comes to immigration issues. There is layered in so many different things that we have to think about. So I think that's why it's important for us to really educate ourselves
Yeah.
about religious freedom in America, but also be willing to really, as I say, disrupt the narrative. I sit around religious freedom tables where, there are some people that I know do not want to hear the narrative from the African American perspective or even from the perspective of indigenous or First Nation people. But we have to remember that um, religion was and has been a weapon and a tool to oppress communities. I
Yeah.
mean, even if you think back to the boarding schools where Native
Mm.
people were then taken away from their families and their
Yes.
tribes. They were stripped of their cultures and their religion, and then I mean haircut and outfits changed, and they were placed in boarding schools. I mean, and then and forced to study a religion in which they didn't necessarily ascribe to. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to really think deeply about these things and what's happening even in this current moment, and
Yeah.
why communities are crying out, because that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Communities are crying out, and we've been crying out for a very long time.
Yeah. 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 And it's just to the point where it seems like it's the tipping point. We've reached the
Whew.
tipping point, and it feels like we've
Mm-hmm.
reached it before, but I don't know. I just, yeah. And you said so many things that are just so meaningful and impactful that, like, you brought to my remembrance the incidents with the Native Americans who went to the boarding schools. I forgot about that stuff. I forgot about
Right.
all of these things that Christianity didn't just oppress my people; it oppressed the people who were here first. It's just,
Absolutely.
so we do have to think deeply about this. We do
Right.
have to
And I
think
want to add,
deeply.
yeah, and Tiffany, I want to add to that. Like, people need to even think about it in the context of Black churches and what has happened to Black churches and Black religious communities over
Whew.
time, right?
Like,
So when I think about the 16th Street bombing that happened in Alabama, right? For me, that most people just say, "Oh, that was a hate crime, a racially based hate crime." Yeah, it was a hate crime, but it was also a religiously motivated hate crime. It was an infringement on their religious freedom rights to gather and
mm,
to worship and to practice. And so one of the things that I'm committed to is helping people to understand that, you know, when churches are bombed, just like when synagogues are bombed and when gradoras are targeted, that and mosques are targeted, that we have to also think about how, like, the same experiences for Black churches has been critical. Like, it has been a violation of religious freedom rights. And so one of the things that moved me to really think about this deeply and doing the work was what happened at Mother Emanuel
yes,
African Methodist Episcopal Church in
yes.
Charleston. When I saw this, I saw more than a racially motivated crime, right? I then saw this a violation, this assault on their religious freedom. And I highly recommend, like, if you haven't seen it, Emmanuel, the movie, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it tells their stories and their experiences, and and it frustrates me. Like, even now I can feel it, how Dylan Roof, like, was very intentional in what he did. And so, yeah, we have to think about all these things, race, religion, religious freedom. Yeah, we got to talk about all of it. Mm-hmm.
But we have to realize that that all of that is intertwined into everything that we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
Yes.
it's so interconnected, and it's such a delicate topic, and people hold these things near and dear to their hearts, but we have to do this heavy lifting to be able to have these discussions about the issues that we have, and look beyond our own comfort level, our own the only things that we
Mm-hmm.
find sacred and dear, and understand that somebody else holds these values sacred and dear just like you hold yours.
Right,
And we can't
right.
trample over each other just because it's different.
Right. No, that's why dialogue is important, right?
Mhm.
Dialogue. That, you know, I'm grateful for one of my colleagues and my friends, Reverend Kristen Looney. She's an Episcopal priest, and we work together for a religious freedom organization. And one of the things that she brought into the conversation was the importance of having dialogue.
Yes.
So a lot of times people want to jump straight to advocacy without engaging in dialogue. And so
Mhm.
dialogue is important because it's a big part of education,
Yeah.
which dialogue is simply, you know, listening for understanding, right? It's like
Mhm.
you are engaged in a discussion with someone where you're deeply listening for understanding, that you're doing it, coming into the dialogue with an open mind, and with a healthy sense of curiosity and a healthy sense of self. And so, that's where the work really begins, right? It's about, you know, talking to your friends, right? And thinking more deeply about your friendships. One of the things that I'm fortunate to have is that I have friends that are from many different backgrounds, and
Mhm.
especially religious
Me too.
traditions. And
Mhm.
so, you know, I love the fact that, you know, we can reach out to each other and we can ask questions. Last year, I participated in this thing called Living Room Conversations, and it
Mm.
was around a reckoning with Thomas Jefferson. And we know
Mm.
Thomas Jefferson is a founding framer of the Constitution, and we know very problematically that, you know, he championed religious freedom, but he didn't champion human freedom, right?
Mm.
That he enslaved Africans, and even after his death, he didn't release them. So it was, I mean, so it's very complicated. He did good for our country, and then also there are a lot of things that he did bad and he didn't get right. But there was this conversation about a reckoning with Jefferson for this living room conversation. And I was very intentional. I decided to host one in my home, and I was very intentional about who I invited. I wanted to invite my friends that have different worldviews than I do, because I wanted to, engage more deeply about the conversation and our perspectives on what happens in the American democracy. And so I think it's important that people, cultivate relationships with people that come from different religious traditions, different belief systems, from different cultures, and that, we ask questions. One of the people in my life that made a huge difference earlier on, even before, this was when I was in New Jersey, was my friend Sloan Lee. When I met Sloan, one of the things that Sloan talked about was the universe. He didn't talk about God. He didn't talk about religion. He talked about aliens. And I thought that it was beautiful, because when I growing up, my mom watched a lot of Star Trek.
Okay.
And so he had already given me this perception that there's life beyond Earth, right? That there are other worlds out there. And so by the time I met Sloan, there were these conversations that we had that were really healthy and good and helped me to understand. But also, he never gave himself a label, right? He never said whether he was religious or non-religious, and I just knew that we just bonded, and we had a really good friendship. And one day, Tiffany, I'm just being honest and transparent, there was a moment in which I had to really check myself and realize that the friendship that I had with Sloan was more important than trying to think about or raising the question of whether or not he was saved, whether or not he was Christian. None of that mattered when it came down to the fact that I had a friend that I genuinely built, that I built a relationship and a bond with, that helped me to be a better human being. And I actually wrote about him in my doctoral document.
Get out.
I really did. And yeah, because we have to appreciate the people that help us along our path, that think differently than how we think.
And honestly, for me, that also makes me think about, I need to set the rubric different for the people that I invite into my spaces and into my friendship circle. Do you make me better as an individual versus, do we have to connect in a religious way? Do we have to understand each other in that way? Are there other connections that we can make with one another? Because you'll find that some of the most evil people you'll ever meet will have something in line or something similar to you that you don't want to be affiliated with, be it religious lines or cultural lines or what have you. It just kind of makes me curious and more introspective when I think about how much weight I put on people's faith, because as the person I am, I do put a lot of weight on that. And the real question is, does it really, really matter? Are they a decent person? Do they respect me? Do they care for me? Do they make me think? Do they push me to be better? And it's just a very interesting perspective. So it just kind of opens me up to different possibilities and different connections I can make with people in that way.
And that's good, Tiffany. That's good to think about and reflect on. One of the things that I think about as far as my parents, I grew up Pentecostal. I grew up in a I grew up Pentecostal, so people know it to be a very strict religious tradition or denomination within Christianity. My dad was a Pentecostal preacher, but I also learned compassion from my parents. My dad, I would see my dad oftentimes when he would do business. He would travel up here to Washington, D.C., and he would see maybe a homeless person on the street, and he would buy them something, and he would give them a meal, or he would help somebody out. out, he never asked, what's your religious tradition, right? He never asked that question. He just saw that a person had a need.
And
And my
met it.
mom is yeah, my mom is like, she was a compassionate giver. And so that was important. Now, I will also say that my parents were also quick to ask the question. Anytime I was dating somebody, my mom would always say,
Are
you
you
know,
saved?
are they saved? You know, I mean, that was just a part of it. My dad would quote Amos 3:3, can two walk together except they agree? And I was like, you know, so that, you know, that challenged me. But
Yeah.
meeting Sloan provided a different perspective and everything. And then also, you know, in thinking about like the beauty that comes with our differences, right? Is that I believe all of us can find common ground through our humanity.
We can,
right? Is
for sure.
that if we work, and if the person's eyes are open, right? Because there's some people that do not still value the humanity of someone that is different from them.
Right.
So
So
it's like that's where we can find common ground, and that's quite honestly, that's what I've tried to do in raising my son. So, like, you know, I know you sent me some questions and you asked about children embracing people from other faiths.
For sure. And I was, because we have to get the next generation on this bandwagon. We can't, because we can't repeat this cycle. Like, this is something we have to let go of. So how do we foster, first of all, how do we foster an environment where people from all religious backgrounds can feel comfortable? And then how do we teach this to children?
Right. One of the things that I often think about is the golden rule, right? The golden rule is applicable in all religious traditions as well as none.
It is.
So as far back as 1 million BCE, before Common Era, hunters were practicing the golden rule. Why? Because they needed each other to survive. They recognized, like, I mean, just think back 1 million BCE. That was long ago. But they recognized that they needed one another. And so if people really believe in some of the sacred texts in which they cherish, then they will practice extending the love and the kindness and the compassion towards people that believe differently or the same as they do. Because, and the reason why I say as the same, because also we have to keep in mind that, you know, that religious traditions and identities go across the spectrum. There are many different reasons why people believe or ascribe to a particular community the way they do. But one of the things that I say is, how do you engage people? Is like with the younger generation, like my son, being a part of the interfaith community of Greater Richmond. I was the president at ICGR for 2 years, and prior to that, I worked on the programs committee there. But before that, I was just the volunteer that came to their programs. And it was my first engagement at a program where I met Lynn, and Lynn was just an incredible person. When we walked in the door, she was welcoming, and I remember just the warmth that I felt from Lynn when I walked in, and then how kind she was towards us. And then there were so many people there from many different traditions, and there was a time where we were singing a song because it was around International Day of Peace, and so we were holding hands singing a song by it was a group called Universal Dances of Peace, and they had us singing a song, holding hands and walking around. And I remember that some of the words to the song, I bring peace with every step, with every breath, I bring peace. And so as we were singing the song, I was watching my child, and my child was not holding hands with me. He had already gravitated to someone else in the space and was holding hands with them singing the song. And that to me was a pivotal moment in my engagement in doing interfaith work and really connecting him with community. So I became intentional. I became intentional with the programs that I could bring him to during as especially the ones in the evening, right? I was trying to bring him to programs so he could engage. So when we got invited to go to the Sikh Gurdwara, I took my son with me. Like, why not? You know, we had this wonderful experience to be in this in the presence of our Sikh brothers and sisters, and it was so important to me that I had my child with me. It was also important to me that, you know, at some point we studied or we practiced family meditation with the Ikoji Buddhist Center in Richmond, Virginia. Like, you know, just being in that space and seeing parents, it was parents and children coming together, learning the importance of mindfulness and using Buddhist meditation to really think through things. And, you know, it was just so important. So I just really became very intentional. And so now, like, you know, when Xavier sees it, he knows interfaith symbols when he sees them. And at the same time, now that I do work for religious freedom, that, you know, he knows that it's not right to discriminate against people that have different beliefs or that look differently or feel differently about things. So, you know, it's the parents' responsibility to really ask themselves the question, how do I want my legacy to be remembered as a parent? And what do I want to give to my children? How do I want my child or my children to evolve in life? And what does that look like as far as their care and their responsibility to human beings, right? So it's like, you know, I think about all those things, and I will say, like, my child, hands down, is one of my favorite people in the world, just because he is a very compassionate human being.
Yeah, I even noticed that in him as when he would like run around the office and things like that. I would see how he would just kind of, not necessarily his just kind of see how he would interact with people and how he would interact even in his own quiet spaces. He would how he would,
Yes.
and you can just feel the gentleness that kind of exuded out of him without he wasn't even trying, you know.
Right. Right.
And it's just, and kind of what you brought me back throughout this whole discussion here is that we have to start seeing the humanity in people. And when you talk about the golden rule, I remember when I was in college, my first year in college, I did a survey of religions. My first year, it was just something, it was Introduction to Religious Studies. And in that, you study, just you do a broad stroke of all the faiths, both, you know, Abrahamic, and then you start talking about Buddhism, Hinduism, you know, different Eastern religions and things that are not. And you'd be surprised the through line in all of them. And it comes back to the golden rule that you were saying, that the general rule out of all of them is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so we
Yes.
have to I think we just have to get back beyond race or religion or what have you, and just to start seeing the genuine humanity in people.
Right. We do. We have to see each other's humanity. We have to value that. And at
Yeah.
the same time, we have to celebrate our differences and the
Yes.
beauty of the differences that we have. You know, as a Black woman in America, you know, I love who I am. I love my hair. I love, you know, the fact that, you know, I can do my hair in many different ways. I love the fact that as a Black woman that I'm not, that I don't have to ascribe to any particular religious identity, right? That I'm free to do so. But at the same time, I need people to value my humanity as a Black woman in America. And so, and a lot of times that gets overlooked. And I'll go back to I'll say this, Tiffany. One of the things that I was very intentional about when I did my doctoral research was I specifically was addressing interfaith communities, because what I noticed is that, you know, when interfaith communities would come together, we would have like a lot of kumbaya moments, and we would talk and listen about like each other's religious traditions, the beliefs, the values, the rituals, and even see how some of the symbolism was important, but we wouldn't talk about the human issues that impact or issues that marginalize communities. communities. And
Yeah.
so for me, at the end of the day, my thing was that, if interfaith communities continue to overlook racism and oppression, that then they fail to really live up to the missions that they proclaim, that value human beings, or I would say that they proclaim to be inclusive, right, and to promote unity. Because when I came to the interfaith table, I brought all of Sabrina. I brought my
Absolutely.
history from Petersburg. I brought my experiences from New Jersey. I brought my belief systems with me. I brought all that comes with my Blackness. Like, all of that came with me to the table, and you can't divorce that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, which is why, like, a big part of it was critical for me, is that I will say this: one of the stories that or the moments that really inspired my work also was when the Charleston shooting happened. As you can see, I've talked about this several times, but it was a very pivotal moment for me. I remember when Reverend Angelo Chapman and he still is the university pastor at Virginia Union University. But when that happened, when the Charleston shooting happened, I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I said to myself, I need to say something. I recognized that as a Black woman who was leading an interfaith organization, I needed to say something, because on many of the consensus statements that were being made, rarely was racism named. It often fell under bigotry and xenophobia, right? But I was like, we need to name racism. And so I felt like I needed to say something. And I remember I saw Reverend Chapman in the hallway one day at STVU, and he had mentioned that there was going to be a memorial service. And I was like, great. I was like, let me know how the Interfaith Council can help, or contribute to the conversation, or support. And he reached out to me that same evening, and he
Wow.
said, you need to say something. And I said, it's funny that you say that, because I felt like I needed to say something. And so the memorial service happened, and I wrote a statement. I sent it out to my fellow interfaith people that were a part of the organization, saying, this is what's happening at the school. And when the memorial service happened during the day at the in the chapel, I looked out into the audience when I was getting ready to give my remarks, and the only person that I saw from the interfaith community sitting in the audience, because it was a sea of Black faces that were there, because we know majority of people that work at Virginia Union are African American, and also
Right.
the student African American. But when I looked out into the audience, the one face that I saw that was different was that of my friend Annette Khan, who is a white woman that is a Muslim. And in that moment, I realized, and I said to myself, what does it mean for marginalized communities to stand together? Right? It's like, and some people, and I would say this, in the interfaith world, there are some people that are also challenged, and even at times I'm challenged by the fact that, as far as converts, but if you know Annette, like Annette and I became really good friends. Like, when we were talking about Peace for Palestine and they had a rally, I showed up to support her. And so to see Annette sitting in the audience for something that was causing pain for the Black community, it meant volumes to me. It meant so much to me, and I will never forget that. And so, like, I see that as my call and my responsibility to continue to speak out against the injustices that happen to everyone, to really try to bridge the gap and find common ground in these areas that have often caused more division. And so, so it's important that we recognize this, and that it's important that we also remember that, the separation of church and state is good. It protects religions, right? And it protects non-religions.
Well, okay, so then since you brought that up, what is the separation of church and state? What does that mean? Is it hellfire and damnation? What is it?
No, the separation of church and state is what I mentioned earlier. As far as government not getting entangled in religious with religious groups, right? It's
Right.
about government not proclaiming a state-sanctioned religion. Like, for example, not saying that the United States is a Christian nation. I actually wrote an op-ed called "The Two Big G's: God and
Hey,
Government."
go
So
ahead,
how
girlfriend.
Oh, you're so funny. But I mean, here's the thing this to think about is that no one, and religious leaders really need to think about this, no one wants the government to come in and say, this is what you should do in your religious tradition. This is how you should do it. This
Mm,
is what you believe. If Christians don't want that, they shouldn't want that for anyone else. So you
mm,
don't want the government involved in your business, right?
mm,
At the
mm,
same time, and because again, it's a violation of the establishment clause if that happens. At the same time, it's like we have to make sure that if you don't want the government to be involved in your business, then you probably shouldn't take government money, right? So religious religious communities, and it gets very murky because
it
I
does.
know right now with the stimulus bill, right there, it was written into the stimulus bill for relief to be provided to houses of worship where they could apply for loans. And I'm not a legal expert, so I won't speak on this.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly have enough legal experts at Americans United that you can reach out to if you want to ask this. But and I could send the article to you. But the
Please.
what I was saying is that we have to remember history. It goes back to history, right? When government has gotten involved with religion, and many times it has not been good, right? It's
Mm,
and also I make it I in the article I even talk about how that complicates things for racial minority communities,
mm-hmm.
and how, and we talked about this earlier in terms how we were treated. So yes,
Right.
like, we got to definitely keep church and state separate. That's like not having public money, taxpayer money to go towards funding private religious education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are things that people have to think about. So
Right. Right. And how it can have so many terrible repercussions. To have, and I don't think people understand how much of a problem it is for other countries that have that everything is decided for them. They have one religion, they have one you pledge allegiance to the government, you do this, you do that. That it's actually a blessing to be able to have religious freedom where you do have the liberty to be able to go explore, to question, to even experience other religions other than your own. And I feel like, unfortunately, we don't take advantage of that either.
right. I mean, I think about when you said that, immediately who came to mind was my friend Shino. Shino is from Japan. And so she's a Catholic, and so she's
Mhm.
a religious minority in Japan. And so
Mhm.
when I met her, and she started taking some of the classes that we were offered at my previous job with the Religious Freedom Center. It was like, there was this moment for her. And so now she's doing a lot of work centered around, looking at issues that pertain to religious minorities in other spaces, and looking at, things that are happening in Japan as well as here in the United States. But she valued like the freedom that we have in the US, that,
Mhm.
she couldn't be as open about her religion in Japan, but here, she has the freedom to do so. And so I think,
Yeah,
yeah, we need to celebrate that a bit more, but also still, challenge the narrative. Like I still
for
say
sure.
we need to challenge
Absolutely.
the narrative of some people.
Absolutely.
But yes, we have to value this precious constitutional right that we all have, and we have to value humanity to really get to a place of healing, understanding, and eventually progress. And it's unfortunate that it continues to take a very long time for progress to happen. And also, I would say this: that's why people need to pay attention to what's happening. What's happening in the public square when conversations are happening around like the Department of Education with SCOTUS cases, like those things is important to be aware of. And so
Wow.
one of the things that we have coming up with Americans United is there's a summer series where people can engage. They can watch webinars that'll be taking place every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Online, you can join conversations and understand it. I actually have one that I'll be hosting about social
Oh,
religious freedom as a social justice issue.
wow,
We
I
gotta,
love that.
we gotta
Absolutely.
talk about.
When is the first one?
The first one has already taken place. Actually, Rob,
Okay.
yeah, so Rob Boston, who is a senior advisor at Americans United, did one about
Okay.
religious freedom 101. But the next one is this coming Tuesday
Okay.
at 3 p.m. Yeah, if you go to au.org
Uh-huh.
/series, you'll see the entire schedule.
Okay. All right. And that's every Tuesday through the summer, correct?
Every Tuesday through the month of June.
Month of June. So sorry. Okay. Gotcha. I will note that and I'll also put that in the little box below. Last question, and then I know we have lives we have to get back to. Um, how do we begin today to cultivate a culture where everybody can feel free to express their religious views, how do we begin to cultivate that culture? Because unfortunately, we don't live in that right now.
No, we don't. We don't. And it takes a lot of work for some people to get to that place.
Mm-hmm.
We have to learn how to agree to disagree.
Mm.
We have to learn how to find common ground. We have to really learn how to ask open-ended questions where we're getting to a place of understanding about the person's experience. So I often think of Dr. Walter Fluker. He's now retired from Boston University, but Dr. Fluker did work on ethical leadership. And
Mhm.
he had this memory exercise where he would ask questions of different people, like the participants. And one of the questions that I often ask people is like, who were the characters in the plot of your narrative? Like, who were the people that helped shape your beliefs and opinions on certain things? And so I think if we start at a place of where we're asking questions of people genuinely
Mhm.
and not in a combative way, but really
Mhm.
trying to answer for understanding, that's a good starting point. And I think also reading, like people need to read and they need to do research. And if in this current moment, in this climate where there are so many racial tensions happening, rightfully so, because of how Black lives have been treated and Black individuals have been treated over time. But in the midst of a pandemic, I think it's good for people to reach out to their friends of color and check on them, right? Check on them,
Mhm.
ask questions, say, can you tell me what you're thinking about this moment? And Tiffany, quite honestly, that's one of the things that I appreciate, is that asking someone, how are you, what's going on, and then going a little deeper if you have a relationship with them. So right, yeah, keep
Right,
that in mind.
right. Yes, that's very important.
Yes, it is so important. But I will say this, like, since last and I know that kind of gets off from your question, but it still
That's
points
okay.
back to it, is that last week when so much was happening here in the United States, I had former colleagues to reach out to me,
Mhm.
right? And so it's about, again, asking questions of the people that the people that you're engaged with. It's like we shouldn't necessarily have to go all out of our way to do that unless your circle of people all look like you, sound like you, and believe like
Mhm.
you. And that makes
Mhm.
it challenging, but to deeply engage. And so I've had a troll on on social media that has, you know, put out some different views than what I have. But all I keep doing is pointing them to resources that presents a different perspective from what they believe. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be my approach with him. I'm just going to simply present information that states otherwise. And I
Yeah.
think important, that goes back to why dialogue is important. So what people can do is engage in dialogue, ask questions, spend time watching some of the movies and the documentaries that have come out. You know, When They See Us was a great one for people to see, about how, you know, black men and black young men and
Mhm.
I'm gonna say this, black boys, because they were boys,
Yeah.
black boys are treated and, you know, handled in the criminal justice system when they're innocent, right?
Mhm.
The 13th Amendment, you know, watch the
Just Mercy.
yes, Just Mercy is a great one to watch. Also, American Heretics, The Politics of the Gospel. My friends,
Mhm.
I've become friends with Catherine and Janine Butler, who are the filmmakers for that. And so
Oh,
it really
wow.
explores all the issues that we talked about today: race, religion, politics, like, and it shows that, you know, yeah, there's a reckoning that needs to happen in the United States, and we need to tell these stories. So
Yes.
those are some of the ways in which people can do this. And again, I say do it with a healthy sense of self. If people know that they plan on going in to attack or to persuade or
Mm.
to try to convert, then they
Mhm.
need not engage in those conversations,
Agreed. Agreed.
because they're not ready to do so. And then also, for those of us that feel like we are ready, we also have to remember, what is it that we're carrying with us into the moment. So again, I point back, last week I wrote an op-ed addressing the moral imperative of religious freedom after seeing what Jerry Falwell Jr. put out there about having a mask, only wearing a mask if it had blackface on it. And he was targeting Governor Ralph Northam. But it was like, after I wrote that op-ed, it came from a place of my pain. It
Yeah.
came from a place of my pain, my anger, my frustration, and I put it to my pen, right? And I was
Yes.
just, let me put this out there. Then afterwards, I had to decide for myself, Sabrina, like, what are you going to do? And so I decided that I will hold a place for grief. I will hold a place for anger. I will hold a place for my pain. But at the same time, I'm going to hold more space for hope. And so that's where I am
Mm.
right now. You know, it's like I'm holding space for hope. Actually, my glass actually says choose happy. And I know
Yes.
everything it's not going to make us happy,
Yes.
but there are moments when we have to choose, like, you know, I need to choose this for me. I
Yes.
need to choose this because I need to be a fully functioning adult, a fully functioning employee. I need to be a fully functioning mother to my Black son. And so,
Mm.
so those are all the things that I say that in this moment that we could do to make to make progress happen. So, yeah, and one more thing I would offer is there was a recent article that was written by Reverend William H. Lamar that really talks about, like, what's happening with the American democracy. And I don't want to
Mhm.
say the title of it because I will chop that up because I can't remember the title, but it's such a powerful op-ed to be read. So there, I mean, and there are scholars that are doing this work. So people have to be intentional and want to do the research. And
Yeah.
for those that don't identify with a community of color, they have to be willing to, you know, take initiative in doing that themselves. Don't wait for us to always teach you.
Yes. Yes. On that note, this has been such a wonderful, rich discussion about how we begin the healing process in this vein, in this area that I think we kind of overlook and don't realize how closely intertwined it is to every part of our being. And
Right.
I think the work that you do is necessary. I think it's amazing. I think it is wonderful. I think it's powerful. And I ask and I hope and I plead that you will keep moving forward because it's necessary. It's
Thank you.
necessary. And
Thank
I
you.
just thank you for sharing your time with me today. It means so much. Um, Please give Xavier a hug for me. Before you do go, if it's okay, can we do a Spitfire fun question thing for you?
Yes, of course.
Um,
I love fun stuff, Tiffany. You know I love fun stuff.
All right. So the thing I started doing on the show when I have one guest is I will do what's called the pivot questionnaire. The pivot questionnaire
Okay.
is what James Lipton used to do at the end of his show on Inside the Actor Studio. So I just
Mm.
think it's an interesting way to get to engage with someone and find something away from the heavy subject matter we're dealing with. So, all right. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word is excited.
You live that. Um, you do. You do. What is your least favorite word?
The N word.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It causes so much harm.
It
Hmm.
does cause so much harm. I don't care if it ends in an A or an ER. I think it's harmful. I do.
It causes so much harm. Yeah, it
It
really
does.
does.
It does. What turned you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Good music. I love good music.
You and me both. You and me
Yes.
both. What turned you off?
Rude people.
Mhm. What is
Mm.
your favorite curse word?
My son's not nearby, so I'll say it. My favorite curse word is shit.
What sound or noise do you love?
My son's laughter.
Hmm.
It just brings so much joy to my life to hear him laugh. Mhm.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh my gosh. I hate hearing people chewing or crunching on chips loudly. I hate it.
That's a condition. Wait, that's a medical condition. No,
No, it really is.
I know
It
it
really
is. I know it is.
it is. And I can't help it, but it just like drives me crazy.
I get it though. I get it though. You can keep it to yourself. Like there's a way to do it. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
You know what? I always wanted to do voiceover. I wanted to be a voiceover actor for like a cartoon series or something. Like it just seems like it would be fun.
It is a lot of I've heard that it is a lot of fun. And a lot of actors who were on screen like to do it because they don't have to get made up or anything. The only thing that has to be ready is your voice. So you can go in jeans and or sweats, get it done, and you've put in your full day. So
Yes,
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 I've
I love
I've heard
that.
it's a lot of fun. Um,
Yeah.
and last but not least, if you believe, oh, I'm sorry, we've got two more. What profession would you not like to do?
Oh, I would not want to be a swim instructor or a fitness instructor. Not at all.
I got
Not at
understood.
all.
Understood.
I mean, and they're great professions, right? They do incredible things, but it's just like my relationship with the water is still growing.
I understand. I understand. I get it. And last but not least, if you believe heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say at the pearly gates?
Hmm. If I believed heaven exists, what I would like to hear is you really did care.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I remind you of this wonderful person, Dr. Sabrina Dent, who is doing the work that we all need to do and examining what it means to be religiously free. Thank you so much for your time, Sabrina. It means so much to have you and to share with you today.
Thank you, Minister Tiffany. I thank you for what you're doing and creating this platform for people to listen, learn, and engage. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for considering me to be an interesting person. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been another episode of Interesting People. Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, be kind to everybody you meet.